Conditioning is an essential part of any sport. Kids should become fit to play, not play to become fit. End practices with static stretching to help prevent soreness.
Remember that a player on your team will likely be injured sometime during the season, and it's your responsibility to assess the situation and determine what actions need to be taken. It might help of you to think of it this way. A hurt requires reassurance and comfort, but injuries require treatment. Treatment is administered in one of two ways: from you with the help of a first aid kit, or from a trained medical person, often in an emergency room. Let's step back a minute and look at injury situations. For the sake of simplicity, we can separate injuries into three distinct categories. The first we often call a minor injury, or an owie. Owies are very common and most frequently occur to younger children. A child trips and falls and starts crying because the fall hurt him. He's probably not injured, but does need to be comforted and given a dose of TLC. After a few minutes, the owie is gone and the child can resume practice or return to the game. In young children, owies are by far the most common type of injuries. As children get older, owies are less and less common and are rarely seen in teenagers. The second type of injury is one in which some actual damage has been done, such as a sprain or a contusion. A coach must first determine that an actual injury has occurred, then decide on what she should do about it. Can the child be moved? How severe is it? For moderate injuries, you must have a first aid kit available to enable you to clean the wound, apply ointment to it, cover it, and to compress it. Remember what we said earlier. You must always have a first aid kit with you at all practices and games. If your league doesn't supply one, you can buy one at a local drugstore or sporting goods store for under $25. Along with a first aid kit, you must always have ice available to treat a moderate injury. That means that you must bring ice with you to every practice and game. Try putting some crushed ice in the water cooler you bring to practice. When you need an ice pack, fill up and seal a baggie with ice and cold water. It makes a perfect ice pack. You may think you will never face a serious and perhaps life-threatening injury, but you need to be prepared in the event one occurs. A serious injury is one that requires immediate medical attention, either on the field or at a hospital. All coaches must have a game plan to be able to react to serious injury. Do you know the number to call for an ambulance or to notify an emergency room? Do you have a permission slip from the parent to have the child treated? Do you know how to reach the parents to alert them to the injury? Who will take care of the other players on your team in the event you have to transport the injured player to a hospital?
Upon seeing a child go down, the first thing they need to consider is it an emergency situation? Is the airway open? Are they breathing? Do they have a pulse? They need to assess that, and generally you can do that immediately. If the kid grabs his ankle and is screaming, it's probably breathing and circulation is happening. If those other three things are not happening, it's a true emergency. 911 needs to be called, and quick transport to a hospital as soon as possible. CPR or the other first aid emergency situations need to be enacted. If that's not the case, then the situation needs to be evaluated as to what type of injury it is. Is it a fracture? Is it a dislocation? Is it something that the kid needs to be transported off the field or the court of play in a safe manner? Or is it just a bump or a bruise? And that takes a little time. And in that situation, the coach should remain calm, know his kids, know if the kid is a symptom magnifier, if he just screams at a little bitty cut, or if he's a tough kid. And once that's determined, start the RICE procedure, which is treatment for acute athletic injuries, which is rest, ice, compression, and elevation.
Draw up a game plan and talk it over with your other coaches and team parents. It may never happen to you, but it's like having insurance. You don't expect your house to catch on fire, but you probably have fire insurance. We've all heard the stories about coaches who denied water to their players to make them tougher. Well, for the most part, those coaches are gone, and so is the idea that kids shouldn't drink too much water because it'll make them bloated and sick. Kids should never be denied water during practice. You must have water available at every practice and game, and give at least one and preferably 2 water breaks during practice. Keep this in mind. When kids come to practice, they're usually somewhat dehydrated from a lack of adequate amounts of water during the day, so they should be encouraged to drink fluids before practice, during practice, and after practice as well. Children are much more susceptible to heat illnesses than adults are, and so it's even more important to allow for frequent water breaks. If the weather is hot, watch carefully for signs of heat fatigue. Signs that a child is overheating are profuse sweating and a slowdown in play. If heat fatigue is not corrected, it can quickly turn into heat exhaustion and heat stroke. If a child is suffering heat stroke, he will no longer be sweating. The skin will be dry and he may be unconscious. In this situation, move him to a shady area, remove heavy clothing, give him water if he is conscious, and cool his body by pouring water over it. Heat illnesses are always preventable with water and common sense. To review, you are responsible for the safety of your team. That means having the following on hand for every practice and every game: first aid kit, ice, water, and release forms. Boy, that seems like a pretty daunting responsibility, doesn't it? Well, we consider it a serious responsibility, but nothing that a caring individual like you can't handle. Coaching kids can be one of the most gratifying activities you'll ever do, but it has to be done right. Let's review. If you don't know the sport, it's very difficult to coach it. Parents can either be a huge asset or a headache. Even Tom Landry didn't show his emotions. Whether you want to be or not, you are. Don't wait to be in trouble. Be proactive and avoid it. Don't rely on what you did as a kid. Get the latest, best information. The time to get a game plan ready is before the first practice. Well, you're almost there. Remember, there will be times when everyone involved with youth sports gets extremely excited. We hope when anyone loses control, you will be the one to settle things down. Just by volunteering, you are giving the children what they need the most, you. Thanks so much for participating. All you need to do now is complete the training review, sign the conduct pledge, and fill out your membership card. Your instructor will walk you through those tasks. When you're finished, we'll take a break and then return for the sports fundamentals half of the course. Thanks for your time. We hope you and your team have a fun season.
And there's no reason in the world, you see, why, beginning now, our volunteer youth league coaches cannot rise in the perception of these young kids as the coach who made so much a difference in their life. The formulas are simple. It's simply loving the child, respecting the child's capacities, providing what that child needs at those steps and stages, and staying in contact with them. And so these Pied Pipers, you see, that can rise and be such a powerful influence where, in spite of the best thing that as parents do with our children, there's a time when the child needs to step out of family circle and begin to be influenced by men and women such as this. And that's why, you see, I think volunteer coaches are simply a national treasure. And the extent that we can help them and improve and enhance what they do, we've done ourselves a real favor.